Good morning, everybody. This is another edition of the Passball Show, brought to you by JohnPielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. Ready to talk about everything going on in the world of baseball, sports, and unifying America. Of course, glad to be with you, and obviously a very early morning edition of the Passball Show. So, anybody that's up, that's around, if you want to comment on things in regards to, obviously, anything that's on your mind. And, bring it up. I'd be happy to chat. And we're going to start today off by talking about the world of baseball. And if you think about May as it gets into June, and I mentioned yesterday, a great barometer or a big-time barometer when you're trying to determine where your team is at is Memorial Day weekend in baseball. And obviously it's a very long season. At that point, even if your things are not working as well as you want them to, or your team is not performing as well as you expect, there's still some hope. But as you get to the quarter point of the season, you get a pretty good or fair enough indication of exactly what kind of baseball team you have. And if you have a team that is not going so well, it's your responsibility as an organization, from the ownership down, the ownership to the general manager, to the coaches and the manager, the analytics staff, and of course the players, to change that. And I don't know when exactly the time where you say, hey, this is not our season, or things do not work, are not intended to work out as well as they were expected, because I do believe that works differently for different teams. Now, you ask yourself, what is the record have to be? Is it 10 games under 500? Is it 5 games under 500? Is it, just an outright and utter disaster for you to know that this particular baseball season is not your year? Some teams are able to determine that earlier. And once again, it's not all 100% based off of one team's record. Sometimes you can have a bad record, but the talent that exists on the field, you may feel that you could get more out of that talent. So that's why you see early on in the season a couple teams decide to change managers. It's something that usually does happen because the expectation level is a little bit higher than what it was supposed to be. So that's when the manager ends up taking a fall. And then you have other situations where teams are huddled around the 500 mark, maybe a couple games over, maybe a couple games under, and there's a good chance that that team may end up not being in a race either. So it's very hard to determine exactly what that time is. So the New York Mets are in a rough spot now, because you look at where they sit, and they're looking at the Nationals, the Phillies, and the Braves, all good in their own division. And we'll find out over time how much the Braves and the Phillies are really going to be in this. I believe the Braves are for real. I think the Philadelphia Phillies could very well be for real. I'm not ruling either one of them out, but obviously the more competitive both of those teams are, the tougher it's going to be for the New York Mets. And I understand they got a couple players coming back, whether it's Ennis Cespedes, Todd Frazier, guys coming back in the lineup to hopefully help an offense that is extremely, extremely anemic. But the goal should be to try to patch this team up together the best way they can. And I know there is some extreme talk out there on the radio in regards to trying to change the younger players in the system, get some better players out there, and give themselves an opportunity to build around a young core. Now, we try to make the Mets out to be as if they are so much older than they really are. And I know the signing of Jose Bautista adds to it. Everybody keeps reminding me that Jose Reyes is still there. He keeps reminding me that Adrian Gonzalez is there. Devin Mesoraco, how great he was in 2013, and he hasn't been the same since. I understand that they're trying to piece together what they're trying to work with some older players. But this is still a younger roster. Look at the age of the pitchers on this staff. Jacob deGrom is 30, but Noah Syndergaard is in his mid-20s. Steven Matz is younger. Zach Wheeler is in his 20s. And you got position players like Amid Rosario and Michael Conforto. All guys that are younger baseball players. And obviously, you think of a guy like Dominic Smith who may or may not help the Mets at the major league level. Wilmer Flores is not necessarily that old. Brandon Nimmo is a younger player. So, there seems to be a little bit of misconception when we talk about the old Mets. And it's not like you're going to be able to go out there and get a 25, 26-year-old player off the streets or from another team. The only way you're going to be able to do that is if you decide to make a significant trade, and a trade involving one of your big pitchers. Now, I'm not in favor of it. It's not something that I would personally do. My thought process would be, even if the season does not produce the fruit of a playoff experience, I would try to build around the younger players and the pitchers that you have on this team, which would require the Mets to spend money. I would want to be in it when it comes to the sweepstakes for Manny Machado. You bring in a player like that, you sign him to a 10-year contract, you set himself up with a 3 or 4 year opt-out clause that he could continue to produce the numbers that he's put up this year and in past, and then opt out of his deal, and then you let his long-term contract be somebody else's problem. That's honestly the way to do it in Major League Baseball now. I mean, few teams are thinking that way, but it's a very good way to think. If you're trying to get rid or trying to get away from signing a team player to a very ridiculous contract. You don't want to sign somebody at this stage of the game to a 10-year contract like an Albert Pujols or an Alex Rodriguez or a Robinson Cano. You're looking at players that are going to be able to give you something in the first 5 years of the deal, but the second half of the deal may very well be a waste. A guy like Giancarlo Stanton. It's good to have him in his 20s. But is it going to be just as good to have him in his late 30s on the same contract? It's logical thinking, it's conventional wisdom, but it hasn't stopped Major League Baseball owners and front offices from spending not just the money, but the amount of years that they've been investing in players when it comes to free agency. But in comes the opt-out clause. And the opt-out clause allows for the player to get out of the contract. Now, you look at the opt-out clause and you say, hey, it's very beneficial to the team or to the player to be able to opt out of a contract early. Alex Rodriguez, signed for 10 years, gets to opt out after year 7. Now, that's a little bit different. If you set the opt-out to be towards the beginning of the contract, you're giving the player, if he produces well, the chance to go seek a bigger contract. But what it does for the team, it allows a team to sit and say, hey, we may have only wanted you for 4 years. We're going to sign this quote-unquote 10-year contract, but we know we're going to free you up at age 29, knowing that you can hit free agency again. And unless you completely break down, unless you completely get injured, unless you are nowhere near the player that you were at age 25 when you're age 29, you're going to opt out of that contract. So if the Mets basically write a blank check for 10 years and however many million for Manny Machado, they got the chance to get out of that contract after Machado's age 29 season and be able to watch as some other team has Machado during his declining years. So that's the way that I would go with it. Now, obviously, you could trade deGrom, you could trade Syndergaard, and I think those are options. But I will tell you this. When you say, hey, the guy is out on a market, that means all the vultures are going to come out. All the fans of other teams are going to say, hey, I'd like to have this player on my team, and I'd like to only give up this much. If you're going to put a pitcher like that, whether it's deGrom or Syndergaard, or you could say secretly, hey, either guys are available for the right price, you better set the right price up. You better shoot for the moon. And, it's easy to make an example when you're talking about two teams in New York City. And obviously the possibility of them ever trading with each other, especially a deal of this type of magnitude. Imagine Jacob deGrom wearing a Yankees uniform, leading the Yankees to a World Series championship. I'll tell you, that value by itself and the thought that Mets fans could have of that being a possibility, you better damn well get something in return that's going to be a face of your franchise. And the Yankees, obviously, with one of the best farm systems in Major League Baseball, have the likes of Aaron Judge and Gary Sanchez and Didi Gregorius and Luis Severino. They obviously have a dearth of good young players. Now, the Yankees should not be dictating a deal like this. If they want to make a trade at all, if Brian Cashman is interested in acquiring either Jacob deGrom or Noah Syndergaard, he should not be dictating the terms of this deal. He should not say, hey, here's the spare players that I have that may be good players and may rank amongst your top players in your entire farm system, but I don't really need them right now, so those are the players that I'm going to trade. They should be told. And it's not just the Yankees, it's any team. It's the Atlanta Braves. It's the Philadelphia Phillies, if it, hypothetically. The San Francisco Giants, whatever team it may be, you're going to shoot for a prospect that is very much at the top of their system. You're going for a number one. You don't want a series of 25 to 30s coming back in a deal for Jacob deGrom. Otherwise, you don't make the trade. And it's that simple. And anybody that's against the thought of Gleyber Torres being part of the package to come back for Jacob deGrom can simply settle for another pitcher. Cole Hamels can be had for a lot less. Maybe you engage the Dodgers and Clayton Kershaw, but I would doubt that the Dodgers would trade Kershaw for anything less than a guy like Torres. And I understand Gleyber has become a star. He's become a regular. He's become part of this team. But at the same time, you as a Yankee fan or the Yankees organization, whether it's the ownership or the front office, have to make a determination over whether you are interested in getting a big-time pitcher or get another marginal pitcher like a Sonny Gray. I mean, if you want to get a pitcher that has had some success at the top and is obviously nowhere near what the pitcher used to be, you could get a Cole Hamels. You could sit there in your starting rotation wearing Yankee uniforms talking about what it was like for Cole Hamels to pitch in the World Series. And maybe you could share some experiences with Luis Severino and maybe Jordan Montgomery or Domingo Germán. But is he anywhere near a top-of-the-rotation starter at this point in the game? No. And that's why he could be had for a handful of scraps. And if you're the Yankees, that may be the best way to go if you want to make a deal like this. You may not even have to trade a Miguel Andujar. You could probably center the deal around a Tyler Austin and maybe a couple younger pitchers. Not Sheffield, maybe not even Chance Adams. Clint Frazier, probably not part of this deal. So if you're the Yankees, if you're looking for the ideal deal in regards to getting yourself a pitcher and not having to give up that much, and not having to give up anything near the top of your quote-unquote farm, then make a deal with the Texas Rangers for Cole Hamels. If you want to get yourself a Jacob deGrom, if you want to get yourself a Clayton Kershaw, a literal top-of-the-rotation pitcher that's going to lead you to the promised land, a pitcher that could potentially pitch to a less than 2 ERA, a guy that strikes out ridiculously more batters than he walks, you're going to have to pay the price for that. And the price is going to include a guy like Gleyber Torres. As we hit the halfway point here in the Pass Ball Show, once again, John Pielli here with you. This show brought to you by JohnPielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. Don't forget, the St. Aloysius Church is looking for help with the upcoming parish picnic. The picnic will take place on Sunday, June the 3rd, at Pine Park in Lakewood. The AYM Youth Ministry will be organizing and hosting fun games and activities for children. They do need help from teens in grades 7 through 12 to help host the activities. To sign up, get a hold of Joey Tunn, who is the coordinator of youth and young adult ministry. His phone number, or the phone number, is 732-370-0500, extension 202. And he can be emailed, Joey Tunn, at youthministry@staloysiuschurch.org. Last point I'm going to make about this is, regardless of whether you're the Dodgers or the Mets, and I'm not saying either one of the teams have to trade a Kershaw or a deGrom, but if you're going to negotiate a trade with the Yankees, or at least be engaged in a discussion, you're obviously going to be mentioning Gleyber Torres. And the Yankees initially are going to try to tell you no. And you have to stand your ground and say, listen, if I'm going to trade a pitcher of this magnitude, this is the type of impacting core player that I need back. And I don't know if you could talk Brian Cashman into it, but obviously when Cashman dealt Aroldis Chapman to the Chicago Cubs, what did the Chicago Cubs get in return? The Chicago Cubs got an elite ace relief pitcher that led them to a World Series championship. That's why Theo Epstein was able to part with Gleyber Torres, who at that point was still one of the number one prospects in all Major League Baseball. So Brian Cashman, if he wants to win a World Series, it would behoove him to have an absolute number one to go alongside Luis Severino. So if he's going to make any sort of deal like that, he's not going to be able to get that type of pitcher without giving up that type of player. Now he may counteroffer with the Mets or the Dodgers and say, hey, how about Clint Frazier? How about Miguel Andujar? How about Tyler Austin? He may not even want to mention Justice Sheffield, which is fine. And that's when you, as the general manager, need to tell him, listen, I'm hanging up the phone. Call me if you're interested in parting with Torres. And you may get to a point where you look at a straight-up deal of Jacob deGrom for Gleyber Torres. And you ask yourself, is that enough if you're the New York Mets? And you may have to settle for that. To get a player like that, a transcending type of player that could play the middle infield and be part of the core of your young future, is it worth a guy in Jacob deGrom who likely will be going to the Yankees and win himself a World Series? So if you get that type of return, if you're sitting there with Gleyber Torres for the next 5 years or so, and you watch him turn into a star, turn into an all-star, turn into one of the players that the New York Mets are building their team around, then that deal is worth it. But if you settle for, let's say, an Andujar and an Austin and a couple, a Domingo Germán, and these guys become average and ordinary players and platoon players that can't even become regulars on the New York Mets, you're going to be burning and you're going to lose with that decision for years upon years. Once again, this is John Pielli. We're going to move on because something very interesting happened last night. And, we were looking at the Golden State Warriors as they are pretty much poised and set to get to the NBA Finals and potentially win their third championship in 4 seasons. Get to their 4th straight NBA Finals and win their third over that period of time. The Houston Rockets have been getting a lot of credit and respect. The regular season that they had was outstanding. They earned themselves the number 1 seed in the entire Western Conference. And they're in a ridiculous spot now because for a team that performed so well during the regular season, they ended up being in a situation where perhaps they're playing with a little bit of house money. And the reason I say that is because the talent that exists on the court when you're playing the Golden State Warriors, you're playing against a team that is certainly 4 deep in regards to stars and has many other solid players that are used to playing in a winning environment. If you're going to rank the talent and say, hey, who's the better team in regards to depth and the amount of talented players that you have, I'm going with the Golden State Warriors, hands down. So the Rockets come into this series in a little bit of a conundrum because part of you says, hey, they should be expected to win. They had the best record in the Western Conference. James Harden and Chris Paul and obviously Mike D'Antoni all performed at a very good level last season as head coach and players. And if the Rockets players could somehow get past that burden of not being able to win the big game, perhaps they could compete with this Golden State Warrior team. And I thought they did a good job when they split the first 2 games in Houston. At least they didn't go to California down 0-2. It was 1-1. The Warriors end up winning Game 3. And last night, lo and behold, the Rockets come out with a 3-point win in California. And I'll tell you, now you're starting to think of the possibility of the Houston Rockets being able to win this series. Game 5 is going to be in Houston. And I'll tell you, if you're a fan of the Houston Rockets, whether you're a brand new fan, whether you go back to the days of Akeem Olajuwon and Clyde Drexler, whether you go back before that when Rudy Tomjanovich was a player, you better be filling that arena. You better give this team the utmost and maximum amount of support as you're getting ready for Game 5, because Game 5 could certainly turn this series around for the Houston Rockets. The Rockets ended up pulling off what I think a lot of people, including myself, would have expected to be an improbable victory by winning Game 4 in Golden State. And I'll tell you, if you're the Warriors, that's a bad job. Sometimes you start to become victims of how good you believe you really are. And the Warriors have been good for a very long time. And sometimes you just, you're like that adorable little kid that always has girls making comments to him. That adorable little kid in 5th or 6th grade, and the girls are starting to notice him. And they're all like, hey, you're cute, you're cute, you're cute. And you hear that you're cute so many different times that you're like, I know. The Golden State Warriors over the past 4 years have been told that they're the best, that they're an NBA dynasty, that they are perhaps one of the best teams in the history of the NBA. They perhaps belong on Mount Rushmore more when we talk about the greatest teams ever assembled in NBA history. And you start to listen to the media. You start to listen to talk shows. You start to read internet websites. You start to, read the newspapers. And they keep patting you on the back, giving you love, telling you how, quote-unquote, cute you are in regards to being one of the best teams in NBA history. And you start to believe it because the performance and the results are there. You're winning championships. But, the NBA is a long season, not as long as Major League Baseball, but from hearing how great you are from Game 1 all the way through the playoffs, you start to kind of tune it out after a while, but you start to really believe you are. And once you do that, you start to believe it a little more than having to prove it on the court every single day. And I'm concerned with the Golden State Warriors because I wonder if they've hit this stage finally. Have they finally been told so much that they're good that they may believe that they don't have to prove on the court that they're good anymore, that the results are just going to be there? If that's the case, then the Houston Rockets got a very good chance of winning this series. Game 5, if they win it in Houston, I'm going to finally start to slant the favor towards the Houston Rockets franchise. And I'll tell you how big of a nut it's going to throw into the whole calculations of how everybody expected these NBA playoffs to go. But obviously, if the Rockets can win Game 5, and I'll get pretty deep into it if the Rockets win Game 5 at home. Because if all of a sudden they're up 3-2, they got Game 6 playing with absolute house money in California. And in Game 7, anything can happen, but you'll have that opportunity to play it at home. And I said at the beginning of the series, I didn't think the Rockets were going to win. But if the series somehow made it to 7 games, and that game obviously being played in Houston, I would think they have a pretty good chance. And if I was going to say, hey, how much of a chance would I give the Rockets if the series went to 7 games? I'd give them about 60-40 Rockets. So the Warriors, if they win Game 5 in Houston, I think they'll close it out in 6. And maybe this is the wake-up call that this franchise needed. Going back to what I just said in regards to, sometimes you start to believe how great you are and start to believe that you are exactly everything that everybody tells you are, and you don't have to prove it on the court anymore. You don't have to play at a high level. You don't have to dominate the opposition. You're just so talented, you're just going to win games. If last night's performance was not a wake-up call to the Golden State Warriors, you're never going to have one. And it's interesting to see how it goes because, I can start breaking down the possibility of a Rockets-Cavaliers series, but I'm not going to do that. I'll start it if the Rockets win Game 5. If they hold their home court and are up 3-2, we could talk about the distinct possibility that the Houston Rockets could be going to the NBA Finals. I'm believing that it's trending that way. Trust me. Initially in this series, I didn't think they had a chance. But now you're starting to see Harden and Paul play well in a big game. Last thing I wanted to get into today, and I find it pretty interesting because you talk about quarterbacks in the National Football League, and they have such an extreme value. And we saw, all you have to do is go back to the most recent draft a couple weeks ago. Sam Darnold going number 3 to the Jets. You got Baker Mayfield at Oklahoma going to the Cleveland Browns with the number 1 overall pick. Josh Allen going to the Bills at 7. Josh Rosen going to the Arizona Cardinals at 10. Lamar Jackson going to the, the Baltimore Ravens. Last pick of the first round. Mason Rudolph going to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So this was supposed to be a very good quarterback-ridden draft. And teams that needed quarterbacks are teams that were considering, what they need in the future or maybe going through a quarterback change, ended up taking their quarterbacks. The Giants did that too. They took a guy in the 3rd round. Is he going to be the heir apparent to Eli Manning? Well, we'll soon find out. He was a guy out of Richmond. But you look at the value of the position. And, what I just said in regards to teams drafting quarterbacks at such high parts of the draft, you can never imagine the process and the fallout if any one of these players ended up being off the roster in 3 years. And I don't mean being dealt via trade. Sometimes you find extremely amount of wealth when it comes to the quarterback position. If you got somebody else that can play the position, especially at a high level, then you may want to consider trading an asset like that. And you're going to get a good return. You may get a first-round draft pick. You may get a couple other picks. You may get a pick and a player. But I'm talking about drafting a quarterback in the 1st or 2nd round and that quarterback being off your roster in a couple years. And that's exactly what happened with Christian Hackenberg and the New York Jets. It was 3 years ago that they decided to take him in the 2nd round of the draft. Last couple years had not been so good for him. The Jets haven't necessarily had themselves a star quarterback. And Hackenberg could not get himself in a game. Now that 2nd round draft pick that the New York Jets used on Christian Hackenberg, this player was then dealt to the Oakland Raiders last night or yesterday afternoon for a 7th round pick. Now John Gruden had said good things about him during the Monday night broadcast, so I'm not surprised that Gruden would be amongst those that would be interested in Hackenberg. The Raiders obviously have a star quarterback in themselves in Derek Carr. Connor Cook is still there. He of the postseason experience of a couple of years ago. E.J. Manuel, one time an expected starter in the National Football League, still with the Raiders. Hackenberg will have a chance to compete with those guys, but there's a chance he may not make that team either. And it's amazing as you look at the fall of quarterbacks. They may not necessarily be considered top quarterbacks, but anytime you invest a 2nd round draft pick on somebody like that, you expect to at least get to see them on the field. And the Jets made the decision. They didn't feel that Christian Hackenberg was good enough or ready, especially at the end of last year when Bryce Petty is getting into a couple games. Josh McCown was out. Bryce Petty was in. He couldn't use Hackenberg for a half of a game just to have him get a couple series under his belt. Maybe he makes some better throws than you think. The problem is the guy never progressed. And I know a lot of people want to take the Jets side and say that, he just was not good enough. He just was not worthy of the opportunity to play. And I will say this, I believe that the Jets did everything in their mind that they thought was best or thought was correct or thought was the exact right process to handle this. In their minds, he was not good enough to play on the field. Now, I disagree for this reason. I say, listen, you invest a draft pick of this high on a player, and you can't put him in for a drive. You can't put him in for a series. You can't let him play a quarter of a game in the last couple games of the season. I believe that the Jets made a little bit of a mistake. And for everybody on Periscope, good morning, hello. Hope everybody is having a nice morning. Keep the comments going. Somebody is talking about, a murder in Israel or killer in Israel or whatever. Hopefully that's not the case. We're anti-terror on this show. We're pro-God and anti-terror on the Pass Ball show. But the last thing I wanted to talk about is, you think of the Cleveland Browns, and obviously there's going to be a lot of stock put into Baker Mayfield. And he's going to be expected to be the savior of that franchise. You'll get another previous potential savior of the franchise, Johnny Manziel, signing in the Canadian Football League. So it's good for him that he's going to be playing professional football again. But, Baker Mayfield, who's drawn some Johnny Manziel comparisons, whether they're fair or not fair, is going to be expected to be part of the revolution in Cleveland. This is a 0-16 team, a team that has been 1-31 over the past 2 years. And I promise you this, there will never be a stretch in the National Football League history where a team will go 1-31 over 2 seasons. The Browns, obviously a new general manager in John Dorsey. They took advantage of an extreme amount of salary cap space to address a lot of needs on this team and got themselves, in their mind, the quarterback that they wanted to run their franchise. Now, talk is, from a tool standpoint, that Sam Darnold may have a little more than Baker Mayfield. But Baker Mayfield's stock grew up and rose over the course of the month or so prior to the NFL draft. Now, the Browns were going everywhere possible to try to get themselves a quarterback. They approached the Philadelphia Eagles about Nick Foles. Now, I don't know where the negotiations went. If you're the Cleveland Browns and you wanted to offer a number 1 draft pick, perhaps the number 4 pick overall, the Eagles would be pretty silly to say no. Or maybe if you are the Browns and you wanted to do something in regards to trading down, maybe you traded with Buffalo, the 2 picks that the Buffalo Bills had in the draft, the 12th and 22nd. Get yourself some sort of return for the 4th pick, and then move either the 12th or the 22nd pick to the Eagles for Nick Foles. Now, there's a chance that they could have done that. And the question is, Nick Foles, obviously a great playoff run, a great Super Bowl, led his team to the promised land. Probably doesn't want to go back to a point where he's sitting on the bench. And trust me, I can relate to that. My job, to be in a leadership position and just to be said, all right, hey, that's over. Go back to sitting on the bench. I understand what Nick Foles is going through. He's got the ability, he proved the ability to lead his team to a Super Bowl. So Carson Wentz, yes, is a little bit more talented. Probably is viewed as the quarterback of the future. And Nick Foles probably understands that he's not going to be as good as a healthy Carson Wentz. But maybe, and maybe this is a little bit of cryptic thinking on my part, Foles is thinking that he may benefit from being involved with another company. And obviously in the world of sports, we call it another team. There's another team that may be able to value Nick Foles a little bit more than the Philadelphia Eagles do. And listen, the city of Philadelphia owes him a debt of gratitude. They love him. He's always going to be a hero there. He's never going to have to buy himself a drink again anytime that he steps foot in Philadelphia. He did something that nobody else had ever been able to do. Delivered a Super Bowl to the Philadelphia Eagles and their fans. And I get it. I don't expect him to be competing with Carson Wentz for the job. And I think the Eagles would be smart if they held on to Foles just in case Wentz was not 100% healthy and he needed a starting quarterback at the beginning of the season. But at some point, Nick Foles is going to be sitting there wearing that baseball cap, is going to be sitting on that bench, wondering why he isn't out on that field. And Carson Wentz could be leading the Philadelphia Eagles to another Super Bowl. But at some point, it's going to be best for Nick Foles to be playing for a different team. And the Cleveland Browns probably would have been a good spot for Foles, whether they wanted to draft Mayfield or not. And there's a handful of teams that are putting half-ass quarterbacks out there that certainly don't have the talent that Nick Foles has. Certainly doesn't have the resume of being a Super Bowl MVP that Nick Foles has. Be back with you tomorrow, or maybe tonight. We'll see how it goes. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, especially those on Periscope. A couple people have tuned in on Facebook Live. So, God bless you. And as always, I'll see you on the other side.